The laser measure beeped twice. A crisp, electronic sound that cut through the humid October air of the cul-de-sac. 38 feet, the man from the architectural committee said, not looking at Daniel. His name was Stan, and he had the perpetually apologetic posture of someone who spent his life delivering bad news on behalf of others. He scribbled a note on his clipboard, the pen scratching nervously against the paper. Karen Prescott, president of the Stone Creek Estates Homeowners Association, made a note on her own clipboard. Hers was leather-bound. Her pen was a silver cross that caught the afternoon sun. "That's a 12-foot encroachment into the visual harmony easement," she announced, her voice carrying across the manicured lawns with the detached authority of a courtroom clerk. She spoke not to Daniel, who stood silently beside the massive rear wheel of his tractor, but to the quiet street itself, as if issuing a proclamation. A second notice will be issued. Daniel Mercer said nothing. He simply watched, his arms crossed over his chest. His posture was calm, his breathing steady, a habit ingrained over 22 years in the Army, where stillness under pressure was a currency more valuable than ammunition. The tractor, a faded Massey Ferguson 275 that had belonged to his father, was parked on the gravel shoulder of his own property, its engine cold. It sat where it had sat for 3 days, well clear of the asphalt road and the pristine concrete curb that marked the official boundary of Stone Creek Estates. Stan fidgeted. "Karen, the easement language in the rules is a little ambiguous about agricultural equipment, and this is his platted lot line, not a common area." The rules and regulations. Section 7.3 are perfectly clear. "Stan," Karen replied, her tone a masterclass in polite condescension. She adjusted the sunglasses she wore despite the overcast sky. "The visual harmony easement extends 50 feet from the property line of any lot adjacent to a community walking path. Its purpose is to maintain an unobstructed, aesthetically pleasing view for all residents." She gestured with her pen toward the paved trail that ran parallel to Daniel's fence, separated from his property by a 10-foot wide strip of HOA maintained grass. "That tractor is not aesthetically pleasing. It is an obstruction." Daniel remained silent. He had learned in interrogation rooms from Kandahar to Fallujah that the person who speaks first often loses. He let her words hang in the air, let their absurdity settle over the quiet neighborhood. His farm was not part of Stone Creek Estates. His land, 120 acres of it, had been in his family for 3 generations. It had been here long before the first beige stucco house was built, long before the developer had dreamt up a name like Stone Creek Estates and written a book of rules to govern it. "The first courtesy notice was delivered last week," Karen continued, her gaze fixed on her clipboard. "Since the non-compliance has not been rectified, a formal violation notice will be sent via certified mail, which will include an initial fine of $100. If the equipment is not moved within 10 days of receipt, further fines will accrue as outlined in the enforcement policy." She snapped her clipboard shut. The sound was as sharp and final as a gavel. Stan offered Daniel a weak, apologetic shrug before scurrying back to Karen's white Lexus, which was parked, Daniel noted, with its rear tire resting squarely on the edge of a neighbor's lawn. Karen turned to face him directly for the first time. Her smile was a perfect, straight line that did not touch her eyes. "Just follow the rules, Mr. Mercer. It makes life so much simpler for everyone." With that, she turned and walked away, her heels making soft, insistent clicks on the asphalt. Daniel watched until the Lexus disappeared around the bend. He looked at his father's tractor, at the dented fender and the rust creeping along the edges of the cab. It wasn't an obstruction. It was a legacy. He looked at the sprawling field behind it, the corn stalks dry and whispering in the autumn breeze. It wasn't a nuisance. It was his peace. He had come home from a world of chaos, seeking solitude. But he was beginning to understand. The war had followed him home. Only this time, the battlefield was a strip of grass, and the weapons were clipboards, certified letters, and the tyrannical pettiness of a woman who believed rules were meant to be wielded, not followed. And Daniel, a man trained in strategy and patience, knew this was not an ending. It was the opening salvo. Peace was a foreign concept to Daniel for most of his adult life. It was an abstract ideal discussed in briefings before missions, a hypothetical state to be achieved after the noise and the dust settled. When he finally retired, the word felt hollow, unearned. He didn't want parades or commendations. He wanted silence. The kind of profound, earthy silence he remembered from his childhood, lying in the cornfields on his father's farm, the only sounds being the wind and the buzz of cicadas. His father's passing 2 years prior had been the catalyst. The farm, left to him in a will scribbled on a legal pad, became his mission. He returned not to the small town he'd left, but to a version of it that had been swallowed by the suburbs. The Mercer farm was now an island of green and brown in a sea of beige. Stone Creek Estates, with its identical houses, perfectly edged lawns, and an overarching homeowners association, pressed against his eastern fence line like an invading force. He'd spent the first 6 months just walking the property, reacquainting himself with the land's contours, the way the light fell across the south pasture at dawn. He repaired the barn roof, fixed irrigation lines that had been dormant for a decade, and spent weeks coaxing his father's old Massey Ferguson back to life. The day the engine finally coughed, sputtered, and settled into a rumbling idle, he felt closer to his father than he had at the funeral. The smell of diesel and earth was a eulogy of its own. His only real connection to his past life was Angela Booker. They had served in different branches, but had crossed paths during a joint operation in a place they never spoke about. Now, she was a deputy with the county sheriff's office. They met for coffee once a month at a diner that still had vinyl booths and a jukebox. "So, how's the quiet life treating you?" she asked, stirring cream into her coffee, her eyes sharp and perceptive. "Missed nothing." "Quieter than some places," Daniel said. "Got a new neighbor, president of the HOA next door. Seems to think her jurisdiction extends over my fence." Angela's smile faded. "Let me guess. Karen Prescott." Daniel raised an eyebrow. "You know her." "Everyone in uniform knows her," Angela said, her voice lowering. "She's on a first-name basis with our dispatchers. Calls about everything. Neighbors' trash cans out too early. Kids riding scooters on the sidewalk. Suspicious vehicles, which usually means a pizza delivery car she doesn't recognize. She weaponizes ordinances. Be careful, Dan. She plays the long game." "It's just a tractor, Ange, parked on my own land." To you, it's a tractor. To her, it's a challenge to her authority. She's the type who builds an empire and then goes looking for barbarians at the gate. Right now, you're the barbarian. She leaned forward. "My advice: document everything, every conversation, every letter. And for God's sake, don't talk to her without a camera recording. She twists words like a pretzel." Angela's warning echoed in his mind that evening as he sat at his father's old oak desk. In front of him was the welcome packet the Stone Creek Estates Management Company had sent him, a courtesy they apparently extended to adjacent property owners. It was a 3-inch binder filled with the community's covenants, conditions, and restrictions, CC&Rs, bylaws, and a dizzying array of rules and regulations. He read through the documents, a highlighter in his hand. Most of it was boilerplate nonsense about lawn maintenance and holiday decorations. But then he found it. tucked away in Article 8, Easements and Use Rights. He highlighted the entire, strangely worded clause, CC&R, for 8.4.2, Visual Harmony Easements. It spoke of maintaining uninterrupted natural vistas and preventing visual clutter on lands adjacent to common areas. It was vague, subjective, and felt dangerously malleable. He didn't understand its legal standing, but it felt important, a seed of an idea, a point of weakness. He put a sticky note next to it. Check county records. He spent the next week working the fields. The confrontation with Karen a low hum in the back of his mind. He moved the tractor every day, using it to haul old fencing and clear brush along the northern edge of his property. He made a point to park it in a different spot each evening, always on his land, always well within the 38 feet that had so offended Karen Prescott. He was testing her, waiting for the next move. It came on a Friday, not with a knock, but with the formal, official presence of a certified letter. The mail carrier handed him the green slip to sign. The return address was for a property management company downtown. Inside, on thick, watermarked letterhead, was the formal violation notice. It was dated, numbered, and precise. Violation Rule 7.3. Obstruction of common area easement. Location property, adjacent to Willow Creek Trail. Description: a large piece of agricultural equipment, red tractor, has been repeatedly parked within the 50-foot visual harmony easement, creating an aesthetic nuisance and obstructing the view from the community walking path. Action required: relocate the equipment permanently to a location no less than 50 feet from the property line. Fine assessed, $100. The notice included a photograph of his tractor, taken from a distance, with a red arrow pointing to it. Below the fine was a sentence that turned the annoyance into a threat. Failure to remit payment and cure the violation within 10 business days will result in further enforcement action, including additional fines and a formal hearing before the board of directors. Daniel stared at the letter. The courtesy notice had been a suggestion. This was a demand for money. This was an invoice for existing on his own land. Angela's voice echoed in his head. She plays the long game. He placed the letter on his desk. He took a photo of it, time-stamped, and saved it to a new folder on his computer. He labeled the folder, simply, Prescott. He didn't know what the long game was, but he knew with absolute certainty that it had just begun. He wasn't a barbarian at the gate. He was the ground the gate was built on, and he was not going to cede it. The certified letter was a declaration of war, and Daniel knew that the first battle would be fought on Karen's turf. The notice of hearing arrived a week later, summoning him to the Stone Creek Clubhouse for a Wednesday evening meeting. It informed him he would have 5 minutes to plead his case before the board of directors. The clubhouse was an oversized monument to beige, with faux Tuscan columns and a perfectly manicured lawn that looked more like a putting green. Inside, a conference room was set up with a long table for the board and several rows of chairs for homeowners. Daniel was the only non-resident in attendance. He sat in the front row, a single manila folder on his lap. The board consisted of 5 members. Karen, as president, sat in the center, her posture impeccable. To her right sat Glenn, the treasurer, a mild-mannered accountant who looked deeply uncomfortable. The other 3 members were a mix of retirees and professionals who seemed to regard the proceedings with bored indifference. It was clear who ran the show. The board now calls to order the hearing for violation number 774B, issued to Daniel Mercer, Karen announced, her voice echoing slightly in the sterile room. She read the violation aloud, her tone suggesting she was reciting a list of grave criminal charges. Mr. Mercer, you have 5 minutes to present your case. Daniel stood and walked to the small lectern facing the board. He opened his folder. Good evening. My name is Daniel Mercer. I own the property adjacent to your eastern boundary. I'm here because the association has fined me for parking my tractor on my own land. He kept his tone even and respectful, stating only facts. First, my property is zoned for agricultural use by the county. It is not, and has never been, part of the Stone Creek Estates development or subject to its CC&Rs. He slid a copy of his property deed and the county zoning map across the table. Second, the rule being cited. Rule 7.3 refers to a visual harmony easement. I've reviewed the official plat map for this development filed with the county clerk. There is no such easement legally recorded against my property. An HOA cannot unilaterally create an easement on land it does not own. Karen didn't even glance at the documents. The developer established the guideline in the original community plan to protect property values. It's a rule, and you're violating it. It may be one of your rules, Daniel countered calmly, but it's legally unenforceable against a non-member property. You have no jurisdiction. The dust from your machine, Karen said, waving a dismissive hand, coats our walking path. The noise disrupts the peace. It is a nuisance, which is covered under Article 5 of the CC&Rs. We're not here to discuss a nuisance violation, Daniel said, refusing to be sidetracked. We are here to discuss a fine for violating an easement that doesn't exist. He saw a flicker of doubt in Glenn's eyes. The treasurer picked up the plat map Daniel had provided and studied it. Mr. Mercer, your 5 minutes are up, Karen said, cutting him off. Thank you. The board will now deliberate. She gave a curt nod, signaling he was dismissed. The other board members, except for Glenn, who was still frowning at the map, began whispering among themselves. It was a sham, a piece of procedural theater designed to give the illusion of due process. He returned to his seat. The deliberation lasted less than a minute. The board has voted, Karen announced, her voice triumphant. By a vote of 4-1, we find the violation to be valid. The fine of $100 stands. A further fine of $200 is assessed for failure to cure the initial violation. You have 10 days to pay the $300 and move the tractor. Mr. Mercer, if you fail to comply, the fines will continue to escalate. This hearing is concluded. Glenn was the one dissenting vote. He wouldn't meet Daniel's eyes as he gathered his papers. Daniel left without another word. The injustice of it was a cold knot in his stomach. It wasn't about the money. It was about the principle. She had rigged her own system and used it to legitimize theft. He walked out into the cool night air, the scent of cut grass and fertilizer hanging heavy. He hadn't lost a hearing. He had confirmed the nature of his enemy. She wasn't just a tyrant. She was a procedural tyrant. And the only way to beat her was to become better at the procedure than she was. The next morning, Daniel didn't call a lawyer. Not yet. He drove to the county records office, a squat brick building downtown that smelled of old paper and dust. He needed a guide, someone who knew the labyrinthine world of deeds, plats, and easements not as a lawyer would, but as a cartographer. He found him in the archives, a man named Elias Abernathy. Mr. Abernathy was a retired county surveyor, a curmudgeonly old man with ink-stained fingers and a deep-seated hatred for developers who played fast and loose with boundary lines. He spent his days volunteering, poring over historic maps as if they were sacred texts. Daniel explained his situation. Abernathy listened, his expression shifting from boredom to a hawk-like intensity. Visual harmony. Easement. Abernathy grunted, pushing his spectacles up his nose. That's developer nonsense. A made-up term to sell houses with a view. If it's not on the final plat map filed with this office, it's not worth the paper it's printed on. For the next 3 hours, Abernathy became his teacher. He showed Daniel how to pull the original development deeds for Stone Creek Estates, how to cross-reference them with the master plat. And there it was, in black and white, the clear, unambiguous boundary line between the Mercer farm and the new residential plots. There was no mention of any easement, visual or otherwise, extending onto Daniel's land. "There's your ammunition, son," Abernathy said, tapping the map with a crooked finger. "Facts. Can't argue with survey lines and recorder's stamps." Armed with official copies, Daniel went home and drafted a formal, written response to the board's decision, citing the public records and once again stating they had no jurisdiction. He sent it to the HOA's management company via certified mail. Return receipt requested. He knew it wouldn't change their minds, but it was a crucial step. It was part of the paper trail. His next move was to formally request records, under most state laws and the HOA's own bylaws. Homeowners, and in some cases, affected parties had the right to inspect the association's records. He sent another certified letter, this one requesting copies of all board meeting minutes for the past 2 years, as well as the current year's financial statements and all executed contracts. The management company's response was telling. A week later, he received a thick envelope. The minutes were there, but they were a work of fiction, omitting his entire testimony at the hearing, and large sections of communication between board members were redacted, hidden behind thick black bars. It was a blatant attempt to stonewall him. They were hiding something. But it was a detail Abernathy had mentioned that sent Daniel back to the archives. Sometimes the real story isn't on the maps. The old surveyor had said, "It's in the deeds. Who bought what? And when?" Daniel spent an entire Saturday scrolling through decades of property transfer records for the land surrounding his farm. And then he found it. A deed from 1987. A failed development proposal for a luxury golf community on 200 acres of land that included the 120 acres of the Mercer farm. The name of the bidder on the proposal was Prescott Development Corp. The CEO was a one Arthur Prescott. A few more searches confirmed it. Arthur Prescott was Karen's father. His grand vision for a golf course community had been thwarted when Daniel's father refused to sell, choosing instead to place a portion of his land in an agricultural trust, permanently protecting it from development. According to old newspaper clippings, Abernathy helped him find. The collapse of the deal had led to significant financial losses for Prescott Development. It was a public failure. Daniel leaned back in his chair in the dusty archive room, the pieces clicking into place with sickening clarity. This wasn't about a tractor. This wasn't about an easement or a nuisance or property values. This was about a 40-year-old grudge. Karen Prescott wasn't just enforcing rules. She was trying to finish a war her father had lost. The fight was no longer procedural. It was personal. That evening, a new letter arrived. The fines had now escalated to $700. Enclosed was a formal notice of intent to lien. The letter stated that if the delinquent amount was not paid within 30 days, the Stone Creek Estates HOA would place a lien on his property. An HOA lien couldn't force a sale, not on a property outside their association, but it was a powerful weapon. It would cloud his title, making it difficult to ever sell or refinance. It was an anchor, designed to drag him down in a sea of legal and financial trouble. The threat was now existential. Karen wasn't just trying to fine him into compliance. She was trying to legally chain his farm to her kingdom of beige. The intent to lien notice was a move of calculated aggression, and Daniel knew it was time to escalate his own strategy. But Karen didn't wait for his response. She opened a new front in her war, one designed to harass him from the outside in. The first attack came in the form of a white truck from the County Code Enforcement Office. Two inspectors, clipboards in hand, met him at his gate. "We received an anonymous complaint, sir," the older inspector said, his tone weary. "Allegations of improper fuel storage. Says you've got diesel drums leaking near a residential property line." "I see," Daniel said, his voice betraying no emotion. "Please, come have a look." He led them to the barn. Against the back wall, on a raised concrete slab designed to contain any potential spills, sat 4 55-gallon drums of diesel. They were sealed, properly labeled, and grounded. A logbook, laminated and hanging from a hook, detailed every fill date and safety check. Daniel had run fuel depots in the middle of a desert. This was second nature. The inspectors walked around the setup, their expressions slowly changing from dutiful seriousness to mild disbelief. "This is better than most of our municipal yards," the younger one muttered. He made a few notes, signed off on a form clearing Daniel of any violation, and handed him a copy. "Sorry to have wasted your time. Mr. Mercer, we have to follow up on every call." "I understand," Daniel said. "Thank you for your professionalism." As they drove away, Daniel saved the signed inspection form to his digital folder. It was another piece of evidence, another proof of Karen's pattern of malicious and baseless reporting. The second attack came a week later. This time, it was the Environmental Protection Division. A different truck, a different pair of inspectors. The anonymous complaint was about illegal runoff, claiming he was using pesticides that were draining onto HOA common areas and poisoning the soil. Again, Daniel calmly escorted them across his property. He showed them his irrigation system, with its carefully constructed drainage swales that directed all water toward a containment pond on the far west side of his farm. Hundreds of yards from Stone Creek, he produced his logs for organic, EPA-approved soil treatments, complete with purchase receipts. The lead inspector, a woman with a no-nonsense demeanor, sighed as she finished her assessment. "Mr. Mercer, your farm is a model of compliance. Whoever is calling these in is wasting a significant amount of county resources." She, too, gave him a signed form confirming there was no violation. He thanked her, and the document joined its predecessor in the Prescott folder. The inspections were intrusive and stressful, a constant, low-grade psychological warfare. They were designed to disrupt his work and paint him as a problem neighbor. Even though he passed every test with flying colors, it was harassment by proxy, using the levers of bureaucracy as a weapon, and it was nearly impossible to prove Karen was the one making the calls. He saw her one night, through his binoculars, as he was making a final check on the barn. A light was on in her second-story office. She was sitting at her desk, staring at a framed photograph. Even from a distance, her posture seemed different, not the ramrod straightness of the HOA president, but slumped, weary, alone. For a fleeting moment, he felt a sliver of something other than animosity, a glimpse of the human being beneath the armor of rules and regulations. It didn't excuse her actions, but it complicated the narrative. She wasn't just a monster. She was a person driven by something deep and broken. The moment passed, and she was once again his adversary. With the lean deadline looming, Daniel knew he needed to go on the offensive. The annual homeowners meeting for Stone Creek Estates was in 2 weeks. It was a public forum, the one place where the board had to, at least in theory, listen to the homeowners. He sent a formal request to the management company to be added to the agenda for the 5-minute public comment period. They couldn't legally refuse. His plan was simple and direct. Present the undeniable truth in front of the entire community she purported to lead. He would use facts as his weapon, laid out with the precision of a military briefing. The night before the meeting, his phone rang. It was an unknown number. "Is this Daniel Mercer?" a man's voice asked, hesitant and low. "It is. This is Glenn, from the HOA board." Daniel waited. "Listen," Glenn said, his voice barely above a whisper. "I can't talk long. Karen's been running this board like her own private kingdom for years. She controls the management company. She tells them what to put in the minutes, what to redact. I've tried to push back, but she has the votes. I was the one no vote on your fine." "I know," Daniel said. There was a pause. "I saw your records request, and the redacted documents they sent you. That's not right." A faint beep sounded on the line. The sound of an email being sent. "Check your inbox. These are the unredacted board communications from the last 3 months." She explicitly directed the management company to pursue all available enforcement options against you, even after I told her the easement was unenforceable. She acted alone, without a formal board vote. "I have to go." The line went dead. Daniel opened his email. There it was, a PDF attachment. He clicked it open and saw the conversations behind the black bars. Karen, in her own words, directing the campaign against him, dismissing Glenn's legal concerns, pushing the management company to escalate the fines and file the lien. It was the final piece of his arsenal, a direct link, proving her actions were not on behalf of the community, but were part of a personal vendetta, executed in violation of the HOA's own governing procedures. The stage was set. The annual meeting was no longer just a forum. It was a courtroom, and he was about to put Karen Prescott on trial in front of every one of her subjects. The Stone Creek Estates annual meeting was held in the clubhouse's main ballroom, a cavernous space with vaulted ceilings and chandeliers that were ostentatiously large for a suburban community center. The air was thick with the scent of coffee and simmering resentment. Nearly every homeowner was present, drawn by the drama that had been unfolding in their newsletters and on their doorsteps. They sat in neatly arranged rows of chairs, their faces a mixture of curiosity, annoyance, and apprehension. At the front of the room, the board of directors sat at a long, linen-draped table. Karen was in the center, dressed in a sharp navy blazer, a portrait of composure. Glenn sat to her right, looking pale and avoiding eye contact with anyone. To her left, the other board members fidgeted with their papers. Behind them, a large projection screen was dark. To its right, mounted on the wall, was a large digital clock, its red numbers glowing brightly. After an hour of tedious business, approving the previous year's minutes, discussing landscaping contracts, Karen tapped the microphone. "We will now move to the open forum for homeowner comments. Each speaker will have 5 minutes. The time will be displayed on the clock. First on the agenda is Mr. Daniel Mercer." A murmur went through the crowd. Daniel walked calmly to the lectern at the front of the room. He placed a single folder and a flash drive on its surface. He felt the weight of hundreds of eyes on him, but his focus was singular. The clock started its countdown, 05:00. "Good evening," he began, his voice calm and clear, carrying easily through the silent room. "My name is Daniel Mercer. For the last 6 weeks, your board president, Ms. Prescott, has been engaged in a targeted campaign of harassment against me. This campaign has wasted your money on frivolous legal notices and county inspections, all based on a lie. I'm here tonight to show you the truth." He inserted the flash drive into a laptop connected to the projector. The screen flickered to life. "You're 4:45. Ms. Prescott has fined me over $1,000 for violating something she calls a visual harmony easement. She claims my tractor, parked on my own private property, violates your community rules." He clicked a button. A document appeared on the screen, the official, county-stamped plat map for Stone Creek Estates. This is the legal plat map for your development, a public record available to anyone. As you can see, the boundary between my farm and this community is clearly delineated. There is no 50-foot easement of any kind recorded on my property. It does not legally exist. Your HOA cannot enforce a rule on land. It does not control. He let the image sink in. People were leaning forward, squinting at the screen. 0410. When I presented this fact at a board hearing, I was ignored, and the fines were increased. So I dug deeper. He clicked again. The screen now showed a side-by-side comparison, the heavily redacted board minutes the management company had sent him. Next to the unredacted versions Glenn had leaked, the damning sentences were highlighted in yellow. "These are your board's internal emails," Daniel said. "On the left is what they sent me. On the right is the truth. Here. Ms. Prescott explicitly instructs the management company to escalate enforcement against me, despite being advised by your treasurer, Mr. Glenn, that the board's position was legally indefensible. She acted unilaterally, without proper board approval, in direct violation of your own bylaws." The murmuring grew louder. Karen, who had been smiling tightly, was now gripping the edge of the table, her knuckles white. Her face was a rigid mask. 0320. "The question is why?" Daniel continued, his voice steady. "Why this obsession with a tractor on a farm that isn't even part of your community?" He clicked to the next slide, a scanned newspaper clipping from 1987. This is an article about a failed development deal. A company called Prescott Development, run by Karen's father, tried to buy my family's land to build a golf course. My father refused to sell. The deal collapsed, costing her family a great deal of money and prestige. This isn't about a tractor. This is a 40-year-old grudge being waged with your HOA dues. A wave of shocked whispers washed over the room. Karen shot to her feet. "This is a slanderous attack. These documents are forgeries. He is a hostile outsider trying to divide us." "Sit down, Ms. Prescott," a man in the third row called out. "Let him finish." Karen froze, stunned by the open dissent. She slowly sank back into her chair. The clock read 0230. "Finally," Daniel said, his voice dropping slightly, "you should ask where your money has been going." He projected a page from the HOA's financial ledger. It showed a series of questionable expenses, all signed off by Karen alone. Landscaping contracts awarded without bids to a company owned by her cousin. Thousands of dollars in administrative fees paid directly to a consulting firm that listed her home as its business address. He had one last slide. The most damning of all copies of checks written from the HOA account for personal items designer handbags. Spa visits disguised as community event supplies. As he prepared to click to it, his eyes met Glenn's. The treasurer looked terrified. Not for Karen, but for himself. Daniel remembered seeing Glenn's signature on a few of the smaller, questionable landscaping checks. He had clearly signed them without scrutiny. A negligent act born of conflict avoidance, not malice. Exposing Karen completely would also implicate this essentially decent man who had risked everything to give him the truth. The clock ticked down. 0115. Daniel made a split-second decision. He looked at Glenn's panicked face, then back at the crowd. He had already won the war over the tractor and exposed the vendetta. Causing collateral damage served no purpose other than revenge. And revenge was not his mission. Peace was. He skipped the final slide. "This is just one page of your financials," he said, gesturing to the screen. "I have submitted the complete record to an independent auditor. I believe the homeowners of Stone Creek deserve to know how every dollar of their money has been spent." He had held back his final weapon. He had achieved his goal while giving a good man a chance to fix his own mistake. The clock showed U0:45. "My time is almost up," Daniel concluded. "This has never been about my tractor. It's been about the abuse of power. A homeowners association is supposed to serve the community, not the personal agenda of its president. I'll leave you with one question. Who is the real nuisance here?" The clock hit 00. The room was dead silent for a beat. Then it exploded. "Point of order," a woman shouted from the back. "I move for an immediate vote of no confidence in our president. Karen Prescott." "Second," another voice yelled. Karen banged a small gavel on the table. "This is out of order. There is no such motion on the agenda." But the tide had turned. Glenn, his face now resolute, leaned into his microphone. "Actually, Karen, the bylaws allow for a motion from the floor at the annual meeting, if seconded by a board member." He took a deep breath. "I second the motion." The room erupted in applause. The vote was a landslide. Karen Prescott was stripped of her title and her power in a humiliating public spectacle. Right there in the beige ballroom she had ruled for years. She sat, stunned and silent, as her empire of control crumbled around her. In the chaotic aftermath of the vote, Karen Prescott simply vanished. She didn't storm out or deliver a final, defiant speech. She just gathered her leather-bound clipboard and slipped out a side door, while the homeowners were organizing a motion for a full, independent financial audit of the association's books. Her exit was not with a bang, but with a whimper. The interim board, with a visibly relieved Glenn Thompson appointed as its acting president, held a brief emergency session right there at the front table. Their first official act was a unanimous vote to formally rescind all fines levied against Daniel Mercer and to issue a formal letter of apology on behalf of the Stone Creek Estates HOA for the harassment he had endured. As the meeting broke up, several homeowners approached Daniel. They didn't apologize directly, that would be admitting their own complicity in their silence, but their sentiment was clear. A man who had previously glared at him from his porch now shook his hand firmly. "Thank you," he said. "We all knew something was wrong, but nobody knew how to fight it." A week later, Glenn called Daniel. The audit was underway, and the findings were worse than anyone had imagined. The management company, deeply implicated in Karen's schemes, had its contract terminated. Legal counsel advised the board that they had grounds to pursue a civil case against Karen to recover the misappropriated funds. "We're also rewriting a lot of the rules," Glenn said, his voice tired but hopeful, starting with that visual harmony easement nonsense. "We want to be good neighbors. Daniel, we got so caught up in the rules we forgot about that part." "I have an idea," Daniel said. He had been thinking about the strip of neglected common land that ran along the walking path, the very land his tractor had supposedly been obstructing. "It's just weeds and bare patches. Why don't you use some of those recovered funds to start a community garden? Give people a reason to come together over something other than violations and fines." There was a long silence on the other end of the line. "A garden," Glenn said, the idea dawning on him. "That's the best idea I've heard in 7 years." Life on the farm settled back into its quiet rhythm. The Massey Ferguson sat where it pleased on the gravel shoulder, now less a symbol of defiance and more a piece of the landscape. Children on the walking path would wave as he drove it out to the fields, and he would wave back. The invisible wall between his world and theirs had begun to dissolve. A few weeks later, Angela Booker stopped by, leaning against the fence while Daniel worked on the tractor's engine. A "for sale" sign was now planted in Karen Prescott's perfectly manicured lawn. "Heard she moved out of state," Angela said. "The county attorney is looking at the audit. Might be criminal charges coming. Embezzlement. Fraud. She tried to ruin you over a tractor, and ended up ruining herself. It was never about the tractor, Daniel said, wiping grease from his hands with a rag. I know, Angela replied. She looked out over the fields. I did some digging after that meeting. The old story about her father. It was worse than the papers reported. Arthur Prescott didn't just lose money. He lost everything. He'd leveraged his entire company on that golf course deal. When your dad refused to sell, Prescott Development went bankrupt within the year. He died a few years later. A broken man. I think Karen spent her whole life blaming your family for her father's failure. Daniel looked at Karen's empty house, the windows dark and lifeless. He felt a sudden, unexpected weight, not forgiveness, and certainly not pity, but a profound sense of understanding. He saw the arc of her story, a daughter's misguided attempt to reclaim a lost legacy, to avenge a father's public disgrace. Her methods were malicious, and her actions unforgivable. But her motive was tragically, recognizably human. She had become the very thing she was fighting, a ghost, haunted by the past, trying to rewrite a history that was already written in soil and stone. He had won, not by sinking to her level, but by rising above it with facts, patience, and a steadfast refusal to hate his enemy. He had come home seeking peace, and had been forced to fight a war to find it. But now, as the sun set over the whispering cornfields, the silence that settled over the Mercer farm was no longer the quiet before a battle. It was the deep, earned, and lasting silence of peace itself.